All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome in to today's live stream. We'll give it just a few minutes as people start to trickle in. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I see some people starting to pop up on the viewers list. If you're here, feel free to drop a hi in the chat. We'll get started here shortly. Hi, Simone. Thanks for the comment. Thanks for being here. Welcome in, everyone. Just letting people trickle in for the next few minutes. Feel free to drop a hi in the chat if you're here. Hi, James. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the comment. Welcome in, guys. We'll get started here in just a second. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Taylor. I am the editor and the senior tech expert at SeniorLiving.Org. Today, I am joined once again by Dr. Marianne Matzo. She is the absolute best, and she is here to answer all of your questions about financial planning for senior housing and care. But before we dive into that, would love to just give you guys a little bit of background on Dr. Marianne if it's your first time here. She is a distinguished expert in palliative care and a certified gerontological nurse practitioner with a career dedicated to caring for older adults, improving end-of-life care, and education. She is a retired tenured professor of nursing and has extensive experience as a hospice and palliative care nurse, researcher, and educator. She has also also authored numerous publications, including the first U.S. palliative care nursing textbook. She's a funded researcher and a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing. And since retiring, she also founded Everyone Dies, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating the public regarding serious illness, dying, and bereavement through weekly podcasts and a children's book. So lots of accolades there. Welcome, Dr. Marianne. It's so great to be back with you.
Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And for those of you who haven't yet, you should definitely check out Everyone Dies. The podcast is so great. It's so educational, and it's just amazing to see all the work that you guys have done. So if you're new, scan this QR code and you can check out that nonprofit. All right. Well, we are here today to jump into the Q&A. And we're going to be talking about financial planning for senior care and housing, which is a huge topic. So I'm very excited to dive into this one. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. You'll just need to be signed into a YouTube account to do so, but would love to hear any questions that you guys have, any concerns. And if you just have any other general questions about senior care and housing, Dr. Marianne is very well versed across the board. So if there's anything you want to talk about, we're here to do it.
That's right.
All right, let's get started. We have a few questions that came in before today's live stream. So first, I'd love to ask, from your perspective, what are the most common financial mistakes families make when they're planning for senior care and housing?
Well, it's not just my opinion, but any kind of financial articles that you read or anything related to advanced care planning, the number one mistake we make is that we don't start early enough. I think maybe part of being American is, I really believe that that's a part of it, is that we, as opposed to people in other countries, believe that we're never going to die. And so that death is optional, growing old is optional. And, you know, it's one or the other. Either you die or you grow old. So when you have each of those, you know, milestone birthdays, be excited about it because, you know, you're still here. The other part of it, though, is that when you're 20 or 30 or even 40 and even way older, people don't start to say to themselves, you know, I'm not going to be 20 forever. And yeah, I've got other things I want to spend my money on. There's these concert tickets, there's these really cool jeans that are $200 or whatever it is. And so you think, well, there's always tomorrow. I can always start saving tomorrow. And the reality is that tomorrow comes very suddenly. One day you're 20 and the next day you're 60, and you say, oh my God, where'd that time go? But the time went. And to go back and recoup what you could have been saving from the time that you were 20, I mean, it's really hard to do. A third of people who are 55 and older have no savings or accumulated pension benefits. A third. And that's people over the age of 55. I mean, so they're not that far away from retiring. So what happens to them? And you'll hear about people saying, oh, well, I only have my Social Security to live on. Well, Social Security wasn't meant to be the only thing that you have to live on. It was meant to be what they called at the time a three-legged stool. And one of those legs was Social Security benefits. One of those legs were your pension, whatever you saved in for retirement through your employer. And the other leg, the third leg, was your own savings. So at no time was Social Security intended to be the only thing that you relied on. But some people, especially for women, didn't have a full-time career from the time they were 20 till the time they retired. Women will take time out for children, for caring for aging parents, or they might work part-time because of those reasons. So what they're able to accrue in their retirement account is going to be way less than somebody who, I'm using 20, started at age 20 and worked all the way till 65 or 68 or whatever your retirement age is going to end up being. The other piece that we either forget about or didn't know is that life expectancy is increasing. And so where, like in my father's family, by the time everybody in that family was 55, they were dead. So there wasn't this really long period of retirement. In fact, they never made it to retirement. Well, that's no longer the case. Now you can make it to retirement, and you can make it even 20 years past that. Some people make it 30 years past that. And they'll say, oh, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have planned a little bit better or planned at all. And so, one thing to think about for those of you who are listening who are young is to take a look at your retirement. Sit down with a retirement counselor. They have them where you work. They have them, you can pay for the service. There's lots of ways that you can access that to take a look at what are you saving? Are you making the most of the employer contribution plans if your place of work has that? Are you putting something away? Because that money, you start saving at 20, that's going to be in there for 40 years. That can accrue a lot of interest. So the biggest mistake is not starting. Not planning. I think retirement and end-of-life care that are really probably the two main things that we just don't plan for. We'll plan to extremes a birthday party for somebody and all the details that go with it. But we don't plan for this long period of life, so, and you can say, well, I'd rather have what I want now. Everybody in my family died young. I'm not planning to live that long. Well, we have some measure of control in terms of our lifestyle, but you might live that long and even longer. And then how are you going to support yourself? What are you going to do? You might end up being, the Walmart greeter for the rest of your life. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it would be nice to not have to go to work every day, I would think, when you're 70 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. I know James left a comment, one of our viewers, and said that's a very scary statistic that one third of people don't have those savings. And I can imagine, with your experience founding Everyone Dies, you probably have a lot of experience talking to people about this, end of life care and planning. I'm curious, how have you seen financial stress affect families' abilities to cope with, illness, just growing old in general, with death and with grief?
Well, I mean, not to state the obvious, but it makes it much more difficult. I had, when we first opened our supportive care clinic at the cancer center, we didn't have the money set up yet, but we were starting to see patients, and the patient owed a copay. And, they were telling, I said, just, pay the copay next time. Just, we won't charge you for it this week because we don't have whatever we need set up. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh my God, thank you." She says, "I'm saving for an MRI right now." And I
Wow.
thought, "Oh my God." An MRI, is a test that we use with people with cancer to look to see if cancer has spread, if it's growing, and she's saving for this test. So, um, that let that just kind of like sit in your head for a while and think, well, is that the situation that you want to find yourself in? Um, the types of insurances that are available through different companies. Um, I was working at the university, and our insurance wasn't all that great, but I was also helping with the a consult team there. And I was kind of looking at the different benefits and stuff, and I ended up at the end of my career leaving the university and going full time at the VA. For a variety of reasons, but an important one was that the benefits and the retirement benefits were head and shoulders what the state was offering. And when you start getting close to that, and I've got friends now who their only source of insurance is Medicare. And there's nothing wrong with Medicare, but they don't pay they don't reimburse the physicians at the same level that private insurance. So I had Blue Cross Blue Shield. So I would say every time that I've had to go to a new doctor for something, they'll say, well, we need to, to ask some questions, and, we have to see if the doctor is taking new patients. And they'll say, so just what insurance do you have? Because they're not allowed to turn people away because they're insurance, but they get very subtle about it. And I'll say, oh, I've got Blue Cross Blue Shield. Oh, okay. Well, you know what? I see here that we do have an opening this week. Would you be available? Every single time I've had to transfer care. And I know what's going on. I don't know if the average person would know what's going on, but because I worked in healthcare, I know what's going on. If I'd said I have Medicare or I have Medicaid, certainly would not be getting an appointment that week, or maybe even not even that month.
Wow.
Because they're going to say, or they'll say, by law, they're allowed to say, well, we have all the Medicaid patients, or we have all the Medicare patients that we're required to have. And so they can then, because the physician has their entire practice is all Medicare patients, the reimbursement that's going to come in is not going to be very much. So these things matter. So you think, well, you want to do your dream job. You want to do those things that you want to do. And certainly do it, stay 10 years, get vested in your retirement. But make sure that when you're getting toward the end of your career, that last 10 years, really look at those benefits, because that'll impact the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so crazy that
Yeah.
it can impact when you can get an appointment just based on the type of insurance you had. And on that topic, one of our viewers, Maya, says this really speaks to the major structural issues and inequities with the healthcare system in our country, which is, I think, so valid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can look at all the different arguments and how complicated it all is. And it's, and I don't think healthcare reimbursement should be about politics. It should be about, saying, are the people in our country able to get the health care that they need in a timely fashion, regardless of income, race, gender, age? You should be able to access what you need. And as much money as we put into healthcare, that's not true.
Yeah, absolutely. So with these limitations, like you said, the common person might not know some of these things about Medicare and Medicaid. Are there any other popular kind of misunderstandings or misconceptions you've noticed that people have about Medicare and what it will cover when it comes to care and housing?
Yes. So Medicare is a program established in the 1960s for older people over the age of 65, to provide health care and hospital benefits. At the last minute in the discussion of passing this, they included certain diseases. I think it's kidney disease. If you have end-stage kidney disease, you can get Medicare. And so there's a Part A, there's a Part B. So you get that by virtue of your age. You turn 65, you're eligible for Medicare. There's going to be copays along with that. And they have all kinds of different programs that you can buy into to help cover those other expenses that Medicare won't cover. And every year it sort of changes what it covers, and it either increases and decreases depending on its politics. And so that's an age-based benefit. Medicaid, think of aid, Medicaid is a needs-based program, meaning that you have to have below a certain amount of money in order to qualify for Medicaid. And so back when Obama was president and the Affordable Care Act came in, one of the things that they did is they offered increased Medicaid money to states, because how Medicaid is funded is half of the money comes from the state and half of the money comes from the feds. So a state could say, well, we're going to spend, I like to use little numbers because I can understand them. A state can say, we're going to spend $100 on every person who qualifies. Well, then they would get $100 from the feds. Another state could say, we're going to spend $25 on everybody who qualifies, and the feds would give $25. So during the Affordable Care Act revisions and all that was going on, extra money was offered to the states to help support Medicaid. And some states refused that money on the basis of politics, because Obama was a Democrat and primarily Republican states refused that extra money, so that the consequence was people in their states didn't get extra levels of care. So there are some states like Massachusetts that has a high tax rate and also really good Medicaid benefits. And then there's other states, primarily in the South, where you will find that those benefits are not as good. So what does that have to do with long-term care? So long-term care is not paid for under Medicare, the one that's for old people. They do not pay for long-term care. They will pay for some part of rehab if you have a medical problem and you've spent 3 days in the hospital and then discharged directly to a long-term care for some sort of rehab or wound care or something like that. But once that problem is solved, whatever that is, you're discharged, because Medicare does not pay long-term care. If you still need long-term care, you can spend down your money, and there's a whole process of spending down, and there's websites that'll help you look to see how's that go about, what do I have to do. So people might think, well, I'll just give all my money to my kids and then I'll be broke and then I can get Medicaid. Well, except it doesn't work that way. Usually it's a 5-year period. They'll go back 5 years and they'll look and see, oh, well, 3 years ago you had this much money. Where is it now? Oh, I gave that to my kids. Well, you can't do that. It's got to be a 5-year period of meeting that Medicaid cost or income financial requirement. But when you do, and you get on Medicaid, then Medicaid will pay for long-term care. Now, if you're talking about any other kind of care, if you're talking about, dementia care, if you're talking about senior housing, any other type of care, those are privately funded. You need to have the money for whatever kind of program that you say, well, that's where I want to live. That's the level of care that I need.
That makes sense. So speaking on costs, what Medicare and Medicaid don't cover, what do you think some of the costs maybe that are hidden or unexpected that tend to catch caregivers or seniors off guard when a senior needs care?
Well, it could be their copay for their medications. It could be there might be a cost of living increase, because any cost in any of these kinds of facilities are going to, they're not, we're not talking nursing homes, but we're talking about if you go into independent living or assisted living or continuing care communities, all of those are businesses. They're not nonprofits. People go into them because they want to make money. So how the cost is determined for those depends on whatever the owner-operator costs are going to be, the location and size of the property. If you're in a single room or if you're willing to share a room, those costs would be different. The level of care that you need, how much assistance you need. Let's say you only need, meals. Well, so that's going to cost less than if you need a shower a few times a week, if you need somebody to give you your meds every day, if you have a wound care issue, whatever it is, those things are going to be added costs. And then how much staffing they have. So the better the staffing is, the more that place is going to cost. What other kinds of services? There are some places that have a driver to take you around whenever you want to go somewhere. Some of them have heated pools, some of them have craft rooms. They all have different things, but if you choose one that has all that, then those costs are going to be higher. And so the other thing that you don't plan on is that you don't plan on getting sick. You don't plan on falling or tripping or any of the millions of things that can happen to us if we're a little unstable when we're walking or being in a car accident. All the things of life, that you've dealt with your whole life. It's like, you could always fall, but if your bunions are bothering you or you have arthritis in your ankles, your risk of falling goes up. And you didn't have that stuff when you were 20. I mean, nobody has bunions at 20. But somebody will write in and say, I'm 20 and I have bunions.
Yes. You never know.
Yeah. So those kinds of things increase your risk for something to happen that we didn't have when we were younger. So you say it's an unexpected cost. It's an unexpected cost as a result of an unexpected fill in the blank, because anything can happen. You can trip going down the stairs, or the cat that they have in the house runs in front of you and you trip over it. There's lots of things that can go on. And that's why Dave Ramsey talks about, you have to have, so many weeks of money, expense money, or months, maybe it's months now, 3 months of expense money put away so that if any of those things happen, you've got that cushion to fall back on. But if you're living, Social Security check to Social Security check, where's your cushion coming from?
Yeah, that's so difficult. And James, one of our viewers, said, so true. My great uncle fell and broke his hip and refused to speak up for 2 days for fear that he'd burden the family with unexpected costs, which is so heartbreaking. Oh, yeah, it's so important to have those conversations early. So on that note, I would love to know, what kind of conversations do you think families should be having before a health incident occurs? And maybe how can you approach those conversations, especially when it comes to care and costs of care?
Well, I would say, like if there's older adults listening, or, people even in your 40s and 50s listening, it's so much easier to control what goes on if you're the one who's driving that car. So if you say, you know what, I'm getting to this point of life where I'm thinking about retiring, I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that. What is it I want to do? How is it I want my older age to look? And then you say, and then how much do I need for that? Like I think it's the New York Times, where it has this ad that runs all the time, and it says, how long does $1 million last in retirement? And back when I was a kid, I never even had dreamed of having $1 million. But is $1 million even enough in this day and age? Depends on what you want to do. Depends on where you want to live. Depends on, do you want a condo in Florida and your house up north? I know some people who moved into very small spaces, and I kind of look at those sometimes and think, how do you not kill each other in them? It's like there's not enough space to be able to get away from your spouse because it's not that much space. And I think I guess I put myself into that situation. It's like, where would I escape to? Because sometimes I just like to be alone. And if you have a very small house where there is no place to go, how are you going to manage that? So taking a look at even what you perceive to be your own needs are. I have a friend who does beautiful stained glass, and she's thinking of downsizing to a senior apartment. And I'm thinking, where are you going to put all that glass? You know, so the question, are you willing to give up what you've been doing for the last 40 years? You've honed the skill. And sometimes when elders are kind of thinking this through, they're not thinking about these details of what do you want? What are you willing to give up? What do you want to add? And is there going to be room for it? Is there going to be money for it? And then to have those conversations with your family. And sometimes kids will say, I don't even want to talk about that with you. Please stop. Sometimes kids will bring it up to the parents. There's this book by is it Ruth Shaston, I think, who's a New Yorker cartoonist. And whenever she would bring this up with her mother would say, can we talk about something more pleasant? And that's the title of this cartoon book that she wrote, is called Can We Talk About Something More Pleasant? So you'll get that. Are you hearing that?
Oh, maybe there's some noise going on outside. Let me mute my mic while you talk.
Oh, it sounded like the aliens were invading. So sometimes you'll get the resistance from the elder who says, I don't want to talk about that. You'll get resistance from the kids, say, I don't want to talk about that. And somebody has to kind of put, the big girl boy pants on and say, these are some things we need to talk about. We don't have to talk about it every time we see each other. So if you just talk about it with me now, we can stop talking about it. It's like they'll say, oh, every time you come over, you talk about that. Well, if we could just kind of get a sense of what's going on here, what it is you want, what are your desires, then we don't have to talk about it every time we see each other.
Yeah, those conversations are never fun to have, but getting them out of the way can just, it makes it so much easier in the long run. So, kind of on that topic, when do you think families should start thinking seriously about the financial aspects of long term care, and what should those first steps and conversations look like?
Well, you know, I I I would like not to be too dramatic and say you should start talking about that in your 20s. I know when my daughters got their first full-time jobs, I said to them, "So does your company offer, you know, em em an employer match for retirement?" "Well, I don't know. I'm not thinking about retirement, Mom." "Well, if you don't think about it now, when you're my age, you're not gonna have any money. So find out what the match is, and at a minimum, if they give you 3% or 2%, whatever it is, you match it because they are giving you free money. It's free. You put it in, they match it. It's great." So I don't know if it takes, the parent in the family to, get into their business and say, "You got this job now. Does it have this? Does it have that?" Maybe that's part of it. Um, and or maybe it's part of role modeling to say, "I'm so glad I did this when I was your age because I was able to do this now." But the sooner that you can start saving that money, I don't I don't I don't wanna make it sound like money is the most important, but when you're talking about financial planning, that's what it is, right? It is the most important because you're talking about having enough money to have the quality of life and lifestyle that you would like. And if that money isn't there, then either like if you have kids that are doing really well and they're willing to help you out, that's always an option. There's options if you own your own home, either selling it or there's these programs where they will give you an annuity from your house and you spend down your house so that when that money's gone, then that house isn't there for to be sold as a benefit to your children when you die, but then that can help finance what it is you want. So going to a financial planner, like, like think about it like going to any kind of specialist doctor. If you had a problem and you couldn't walk, you'd want to go to a podiatrist and say, "What can you do to help me so I can walk? Because it's important to me that I walk." It's the same thing with going to a financial planner. All right, how can you help me? Here's how old I am. Here's how many years I have left to work. Here's what I have. And they can say, well, they look at it all and, they went to financial school or wherever they went. They'll be able to say, well, here's the actuarial um, looking at, what we can expect money wise to change. And here's what you're going to be able to afford. So, and these things are moving targets too. So, depending on what our economy is like at the time that you're retiring, like you hear people on the news now talking about, oh, I lost, $1 million in my retirement fund in the last 2 weeks. Well, unless you're retiring this week, that's probably maybe not going to make any difference because something will come and things will improve, or maybe they get worse. I don't know. That's not, I don't know. But those things are there to kind of ride the waves of the market. And that's what the financial advisor helps you to do this. But knowing that Medicare is not going to pay for your long-term care insurance, knowing that in order to get Medicaid to pay for it, you're going to have to spend down all your money. Knowing that you have maybe another 20 years to live, you put all of that together and you say, I really do need to go talk to that financial person because I'm not sure what I have is enough to be able to do what I want to do and support myself. And those are all individual kinds of things that is specific for you.
Yeah, that's great. I love the idea of a financial advisor. I know like my Fidelity account comes with free meetings with an advisor, and it's just so nice to have someone who can kind of do the hard part for you and be realistic about like, this is what we have and this is what we can work with. Because I think there's so many, articles online about how much you should save, but it really, really depends on what we've been talking about, your needs, your desires for later in life. And speaking about starting early, one of our viewers, Chad, said, I wish I would have started saving in my 401k earlier than I did. It was so tough as a 22-year-old who was barely making anything to think about giving even less in my paycheck. I eventually started saving, but I should have been doing it a decade earlier, which is so fair. I think a lot of people, when I was first out of college, kind of were in the same mindset, but trying to do, even if it's, $5 a paycheck, just normalizing that expense as a part of your cadence is so important. And thinking about it early, almost like it's a utility. You have to pay your utilities. You can't skip those. So if you say, well, I have to do this for myself 40 years down the line or whatever it is, but it's so difficult to get yourself there when you're, maybe you're not making as much as you'd like to save. So.
And a lot of those, though, will take it out either pre-tax or, you just never see it. So it's just like, it was never there, so, but it's going somewhere into Fidelity or wherever they put it, and then it'll grow. And that $5 is, a latte nowadays. So kind of put that in, put that into consideration. And also there's choices that we make. I remember when I worked in Massachusetts for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, back then, I don't know if it's the same way now, we didn't have to pay into Social Security because Massachusetts had its own retirement fund. So when you left, though, you got your retirement money. I can't exactly remember how that worked, but you got your money. And their thought was you should take that and put it into some, Fidelity or something, some retirement account. Well, I knew people, because, we were in our 30s probably at that time. I knew people who would, when they left, would take their money and buy a new car. Now, they had to pay like some sort of penalty fee because it was retirement money. But it was like the biggest chunk of change that they had ever gotten because it was saved for them through their payroll. And even at that time, I said to myself, that's really dumb. That car is going to last how long, but you're going to get to be 65 at some point, and that money could really make a huge difference. And but I saw people doing that all the time. So you could be in a position where you could say, well, I could do this or I could do that. Kind of, have a little chat with yourself and say, am I going to like really appreciate this more now or then? Because now, even if you needed to, you could get another part-time job or a little something for your play money, And I'm not talking out of my hat. I used to work like 3 or 4 jobs because it's how I was. But when you're older and maybe there's infirmities or things going on with your body that doesn't let you do that, you would really appreciate having that money.
Yeah, absolutely. Just trying to have that long-term mindset. And a new shiny car sounds really nice, but how are we going to feel about it in 40 years? We have a comment here from Sherry who says, I recently purchased 2 workbooks for my dad from Barnes & Noble to start the conversation about getting things in order. I really love this, and I would love to hear if you have any tools or recommendations about kind of extra resources people can use to get started with these conversations.
Well, we have a lot of resources on our website. So if you look at, some of the topics are what happens to your debt, after you die, or planning for the retirement, those kinds of things. There's a lot of resources in there. Going to Barnes & Noble, that's a good place. You can find an awful lot online, though, that's absolutely free. And you can go to, I wrote this down so I won't forget it, myfinancialweekly.com. So it's myfinancialweekly, it's all one word, .com. That gives tons of information, worksheets, things to think about. And the other is, SeniorLiving.org, another place to get information. They have a long-term care calculator that's for 2025. And so you can put in your money and it'll help you kind of figure out how much you're going to need. The My Financial Weekly, they have budgets, refinancing loans, helping with credit card debt. So all of those things are available. So what are the things you want to do? You want to create a budget. I mean, some people create a budget when they're really young, and some people create a budget never, and some people somewhere along the way will do that. But create a budget, involve your family, see if they can help, see if they're in a position to be able to help. You bought all those diapers for them. Maybe they can help you out. Look to see what kind of legal protections you need. If you need to form a trust in order to shield your assets. And that's where working with a financial planner will really help to be able to explain that to you, how that works, what you can expect from it, what you can't expect from that. You can talk to insurance brokers for long-term care insurance. And that was one thing I didn't mention. Long-term care insurance, there is such a thing. And when I was working at the VA, they offered long-term care insurance, and it was expensive. And my husband was in the military, and through the military, they offered long-term care insurance, and he purchased it. And a couple of years ago, the rates went up, and he said, I'm thinking about dropping this. And I said, oh, I don't think you should drop that. Because he'd already paid like all these years into it. And then we went and had dinner with another general that he had worked with, and she was saying her husband had, I can't even remember, Lewy body dementia or something, and she was talking about how much his memory care facility cost. And it was way more than that jump of long-term care insurance that David experienced in his premium. And, she's paying for it, but the rest of her lifestyle is limited because this is so incredibly expensive. So I got some 2025 numbers. Is anybody interested in how much this stuff costs?
I'm very interested. I'm sure our viewers are too.
If you're interested, I will tell you. So it depends on, again, the type of care and location. And I say location because if you're in, downtown San Francisco, it's going to be way more money than if it's in a small town in Maine. So, Maya, take a deep breath. I'm with you. So, independent living and retirement communities, those are about $4,000 a month. Now, these are 2025 numbers. These are real recent numbers. Assisted living is approximately $6,000 a month. So assisted living has some personal care, has a supervised setting, generally meals and housekeeping, and 24/7 person on site. And they have wide range of amenities, all kinds of different things. So that cost is going to vary depending on what they offer. So that kind of care, assisted living, is about $6,000 a month. So nursing home care is about $11,000 a month.
Wow.
So nursing home care is going to give you, RN, LPNs, aides. It's to help people, like post-stroke or maybe the beginning parts of dementia or physical disabilities, people not being able to walk. So that's about $11,000 a month. Now, memory care, which is for people with Alzheimer's or some sort of dementing illness is $6,450 a month. Now, the difference between the nursing home and the memory care is the memory care is in a safe and secure unit, because one of the things with the dementing illnesses is people tend to wander. And so if the front door is open, they will walk. And so in these memory care units, they're set up in lots of different ways, but sometimes they have like a door they can go out, but there's a high fence around the outside area so that they can go out and then go in, and they can't get lost. And it's a higher level staffing ratio. And as that disease progresses, it's a higher level of care because it's a progressive illness that we have no cure for yet. And so people are going to, their needs are going to continue to the point where if they're still able to eat, they'll need to be fed, they'll need to be washed. So that's expensive. Now, people really, if you ask people, what is it you prefer? People really prefer to be able to stay at home. And that has a term, it's called aging in place, meaning wherever you are, we want to keep you there and you want to stay there. And that usually, excuse me, that usually requires sort of a team of people. Hopefully the kids will be involved, sometimes nieces and nephews, but sometimes you need to have paid help. And so that runs about $31 to $35 an hour for somebody to come into the home and help. And that can be one day a week, it can be a morning a week, it could be a couple hours, depending on what the needs are. Now, the continuing care communities, these are those communities where they're like a college campus. So you can enter into the independent senior apartments. And then if something happens and you need more care, then you could go like there's an assisted living. And then if you need more care, there's like a nursing home. So you buy in once, and then you have a monthly fee as you move up through the levels. And that is about $5,000 a month. But you have to buy into it. And sometimes the prices are pretty phenomenal. And the issue with those are that company needs to stay in business for as long as you need them. So what's happened if you read that section of the newspaper, your phone, or wherever you read these things, where you'll hear about people who will have bought in, sold their house, all their life savings in order to move in. And somewhere along that trajectory, the place goes out of business. Now you don't get your money back. And what do you do? So there's that. And so how do you fund it? You fund it with your personal savings, with whatever retirement funds that you have, VA benefits, if you have long-term care insurance. If you can afford that, definitely look into that. And I don't know, I'm sounding like a broken record, but plan ahead and start early, because starting at age 60 is really too late. Unless you're suddenly making like $1 million a year, then wait and start at 60.
Yeah, if you're winning the lottery or something, you have time.
The other thing that's changed is that back when I started working, back in the last century, there were retirement funds that were, I'm looking for my term here. Where did I write it? So there were retirement plans within your company. There were defined benefit plans where you work there, you got vested in that money, And if it was either 5 years or 10 years, depending on, every place was different. And then once you were vested, when you reached 65 or whatever age they said, you could start pulling out your money. And because it was a defined benefit, it didn't matter how much you put in. It was a benefit of working there. Now, and it started to change for people who were hired well after me, and now primarily they're defined contribution plans. And a defined contribution plan says that, hey, whatever you put in and we put in a certain amount, once you're vested, if it's 5 or 10 years, depending on the company, that money in there, you get it. You can transfer it into a Fidelity retirement account or any other retirement account. Follow the rules for retirement, but that's yours. Now, big difference between what the percent that you put in that defined contribution plan, as opposed to they put it in, they manage it, and you get it back. You get a lot more money from a defined benefit plan, a lot more money for as long as you live. Like I had one that was from one of the places that I had worked that was a defined contribution. And so I got the money they put in, and I got the money that I put in. And in, I don't know, a couple of years, I had withdrawn all the money after I retired.
Wow.
A defined benefit plan doesn't expire. As long as I live, I'm going to get that money. See the difference?
Yeah,
And
times have
so
really changed.
it's a lot harder for your generation, and I don't know the age of the people who are listening. It's a lot more burden on you. And part of the thinking of these defined contribution plans would be that it's your money. You should decide how you're going to invest it and what you're going to do with it. And even when that was being talked about, I thought, well, that's a dumb idea. Because I went back to that girl in my 20s who used her money to go buy a car. She wasn't either mature enough or whatever to really think about, is this the best option for my retirement money? And so there's got to be more than that one girl in Massachusetts who did that. So my thought even then when they were talking about these was, this is going to be a disaster because people won't have enough money to retire at the time they were deciding this, probably, I don't know, 20 some years ago. How are they going to have it if they're controlling it and making these decisions themselves about how much they're going to put in and where they're going to invest it? So I know I'm not sounding really optimistic on this, but it makes me nervous about,
Yeah.
are people going to have enough money to retire? And are we going to, is the government going to mess with Social Security benefits, which would totally devastate many people who are totally relying on that to pay their bills?
Yeah, I know it is crazy to see how much things have changed. And one thing I wanted to touch on, you mentioned, a lot of seniors want to age in place and they don't want to have to move into one of these facilities. And so if any of you out there are caregivers or someone that is a family caregiver, because I believe the stat is 1 in 5 adults are family caregivers, which is so high. But we recently launched a caregivers course on SeniorLiving.org. So it's primarily designed for new family caregivers to equip you with all of the tools and the resources you need to provide care, but also to care for yourself. So I would highly recommend checking that out. If you're a caregiver, it's really, really great. Lots of good tools and resources, and also talks about, financial planning and all of that. So something to be thinking about. And we're getting towards the end of our time. So I want to wrap up. We have just one last question that is more about kind of end of life planning. And James asks, any advice for getting a will and testament set up? My wife and I just started this conversation and we aren't sure where to start.
Well, the simple answer would be to go to an estate planning lawyer, and they will do it all for you. And we set up a trust, and we set up our will, and they gave us this big book with all the stuff in it, and now I think they just give you a CD with all of it on it. But that's the simple answer. More complex than that, I mean, we can, we had talked about having one of these chats about, advanced directives, what you need to think about, those kind of details that a lawyer may know, lawyer may not know, but they're sort of from the medical side of things that you need to understand in the decisions that you're making. But the simplest thing, James, is there's a lot of estate planning lawyers, and I don't know, you know, I would say probably between a couple $100 to $1,000, depending on where you live. And then it's all done, and it's all done the right way. And if you have to make any changes, you can let them know, and they can make those changes. They'll charge you for them, but you can make those changes.
Yeah, that's great. We also have a few resources on Senior Living about kind of all the documents you need to get started. And there's some free online tools for making wills. Obviously, if you have more complicated assets or you want that more human touch, like you said, Dr. Marianne, you'll want to go in person. But things just to get the ball rolling. So that's a good place to start.
To start thinking about, like, what do you have that you would want to give to somebody else?
Yeah.
And writing that down, because it's stressful for families, when they're at the end, somebody has died, and they're saying, well, mom said I could have that ring, and somebody else says, well, mom said I could have that ring. And so, like, if save everybody the hassle, write down who gets whatever ring, or whatever it is, make it easier so that they don't have to argue with each other.
Totally. I know my grandma, whenever I say I want something, she's like, I'm going to go put a sticky note on the back of that painting so that we know that's for you. I'm like, Grandma, but it's important to talk about those things.
Well, I was thinking the same thing, because my mother was like this whiz with the black Sharpie, and anything you picked up and turned over, there was the Sharpie with, like who gave it to her or who it was supposed to go to. I mean, I cleaned out her pantry, and I turned the peanut butter jar over, and it was the date she bought it. It was like, woman, if somebody, you're out of control with the Sharpie.
Somebody take it from her. That is so funny. Well, one last resource to share with you guys as well. We have the Caregivers Corner on SeniorLiving.org, which is our Facebook group that helps caregivers connect to share their experiences and to seek advice from experts like Marianne. And if you join the Facebook group, we have put together a checklist with Marianne's help that kind of talks about all of the things you should have put together for kind of end-of-life planning, the documents you should be considering, the bills and the just kind of passwords for things and all the important things. So definitely join that. It's a completely free resource, and there's lots of other great resources there and conversations with experts like Dr. Marianne. So to wrap up, I just want to say thank you so much for joining. We are so happy to have you guys. Here I've included a calendar with a list of our upcoming streams. Lots of great talks here with Dr. Marianne and another expert of ours. So we really look forward to seeing you next time. And thank you so much to Marianne for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to talk to you guys.
Yes, and thank you guys from the audience for all of your great commentary. It's been really helpful for the conversation. So we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.